The Sikh tradition began 500 years ago in the Punjab region of South Asia, now divided between India and Pakistan. This beginning is firmly tied to Nanak, born in 1469 Common Era, and referred to as Guru Nanak by his followers. Sikh means disciple or student or learner, while Guru in this context means spiritual teacher or spiritual guide. In his lifetime, Nanak composed hundreds of poetic verses containing spiritual and ethical guidance. These were written down and have been reliably preserved, now forming part of the core Sikh sacred text, referred to by followers as the Guru Granth Sahib. Nanak offered a set of teachings centered on a single divine being or essence which governs and guides all existence. These teachings include ethical principles based on human dignity and equality, and the path laid out by Nanak and his successors is typically called Sikhi, the way of the Sikh in Punjabi, the language most commonly spoken by Sikhs. Similar to scholarly debates about Islam or other non-Christian traditions, there's an ongoing debate about whether religion is an appropriate term for the Sikh path, and whether Sikhism as a label of religious identity is adequate or appropriate. Sikhs also typically have a regional identity, that of being Punjabi. In some cases, this regional affiliation is ancestral due to internal or external migration. The central questions that we want to explore in this video are: what are the dimensions of Sikh identity in diasporic locations in general and California in particular? Second, what is the relationship of being Sikh to being Punjabi? And finally, what are the different factors that shape Sikh experience in various locations, but particularly in California? As with any other tradition, there's a formal definition of who is a Sikh, including acceptance of one immortal divine being, the teachings of Guru Nanak and his 9 human successors, the Guru Granth Sahib as their embodied teachings, and the initiation into the Khalsa, an order of Sikhs created by Guru Gobind Singh, the 10th human Guru. Sikhs are also not supposed to owe allegiance to any other religion, or in Punjabi, the word used is dharam. As with any other tradition, this definition has evolved over time, partly responding to historical events. The document which provides this definition includes a detailed code of conduct and conventions, the English translation of the Punjabi, Rehat Maryada. Key elements of this document emphasize the equality of all humans, meditating on the divine, living honestly, enacting service to others, and working for the collective good. As with any other tradition, practical adherence to the Rehat varies, but meditation, honest hard work, service, and humility are very commonly emphasized by individual Sikhs as encapsulating their understanding of being a Sikh. Only a small minority are initiated into the Khalsa, and a majority overall, but perhaps a minority in diasporic locations, maintain the most prominent aspect of that identity, keeping uncut hair, covered with the turban for men and sometimes for women, and always for Khalsa-initiated women. Punjab means 5 waters in Persian and became a more common term for the plains created by 5 tributaries of the Indus, which itself has yielded the terms India, Hindu, and Hindustan. The region is large but now consists of 2 political entities, one in Pakistan, one in India. Indian Punjab was shrunk when part of it was separated into another state, Haryana, in 1966. One reason for this division was the lack of a clear primacy for the regional language Punjabi before the split. In Pakistan, Punjabi persists as a spoken language, but it is subordinated to the official national language of Urdu, which is written in an Arabic-derived script. In Haryana, Punjabi is subordinated to Hindi, which is the dominant language of northern India, written in the Devanagari script and associated with Hindu identity, since Devanagari is the script for key sacred texts associated with that identity. Punjabi in Indian Punjab also has a religious connection, since its script is that of the Guru Granth Sahib, Gurmukhi. To complete this trinity of religion and language, note that Pakistan was conceived of as a nation for South Asian Muslims, who were a minority in colonial India, though Bengali was the language of East Pakistanis, now Bangladeshis. The geography of Punjab encompasses a diversity of religious traditions, languages, and everything that can be included under the heading of culture. In addition to religion and language, culture can include food, clothing, bodily markers, celebrations, life cycle rituals, gender, social structures, and so on. What is Punjabi about various aspects of culture? What are the variations within that category? What are the processes of change and evolution? And what is the role of other factors such as formal political structures and economic forces? Are all relevant questions that have no simple answers. As an example, if someone says they are culturally Sikh, what might that imply? 2 important dimensions of identity that will come into play in the discussion are aspects of socioeconomic status, caste, and occupation. Identity based on national citizenship is obviously important. migration and history complicate citizenship-based identity in ways specific to South Asia. Religion, language, and region are all important dimensions of identity in addition to national citizenship. Caste, a very complicated mix of vertical hierarchies and horizontal kinship relations, is one of the hallmarks of South Asian identity, particularly in India. Caste often intersects with occupation and economic status in ways that are also distinctive in India. Finally, place is still important. Where are you from being a common question in India? The answer signaling through locational origin, sometimes ancestral, various social and cultural identity markers. International migrants may initially retain a significant amount of their original identities, including national loyalties, for example, in sporting events. Dual citizenship supports this preservation. Typically, there are pressures for assimilation with respect to language, food, social customs, and even religion. Depending on the circumstances, cultural and subnational dimensions of identity may erode, despite attempts at preservation. Changes in travel and communications technology and in host country expectations all influence processes of evolution and change in identity. In diasporic contexts, externally imposed identities may be overlaid on self-identifications and may involve misconceptions or bias. South Asian identities in the Anglophone West have included Hindu for all migrants from colonial India, whether Hindu, Muslim, or Sikh, East Indian, Asian Indian, and in the United Kingdom, Paki and Black. Some of these labels are necessitated by prior misidentifications of indigenous inhabitants of North America, for example. Regional and religious identities may survive somewhat uncomfortably or disconnected from their locational meanings. In some cases, migrants may even create new identities to signal new meanings, as for the Indus Entrepreneurs Organization that was formed in Silicon Valley, California. India, the most populous region in the British Empire, provided labor for multiple other colonies. Recruiting was done from specific areas and communities based on the destination and type of work. In East Africa, for example, unskilled laborers and craftsmen were recruited from different parts of India. Sikhs were heavily recruited into the British Indian Army and sometimes became peacekeeping soldiers or policemen in British colonies or enclaves in East and Southeast Asia. British colonial attitudes and Sikh experiences in Punjab contributed to relatively high migration by Sikhs, though less often as unskilled or indentured laborers. Canada, a British dominion, was not in the same category as East African or Asian colonies, but visiting Sikh soldiers saw it as an attractive destination. Sikh migration to British Columbia and Canada began in 1897, the year of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee celebrations. Sikhs found work building railroads and in the lumber and mining industries. While entire Sikh families had migrated to East Africa, here the migrants were typically only men. These early Sikh migrants, often ex-soldiers, maintained Khalsa identities with long hair, beards, and turbans, what is typically considered a Sikh identity. Sikhs began to move from British Columbia into Washington, Oregon, and then California, also mostly for jobs in the railroad and lumber industries. Some of the movement south was triggered by attacks on Sikh migrant workers, such as the Bellingham riots in Washington in 1907. Jobs in California were mostly in the agricultural sector, a large employer in the state. Later, there was direct immigration to California via the British colony of Hong Kong, with Angel Island in the San Francisco Bay as the entry point. Overt racism was a common phenomenon for early migrants from India, both in Canada and in the Western United States. Periodically, this erupted into violence, triggering relocations of migrant populations. In this period, the early 20th century, the numbers were very small, with estimates ranging from about 700 to 2,000 individuals. About 90% of these migrant workers, almost exclusively male, were Sikhs, with most of the rest being Muslims, like the Sikhs from Punjab, and a few Hindus. However, they were all labeled as Hindus by local populations and the media, often described as a threat and stereotyped and caricatured. Resentment and hostility from local populations translated into campaigns by nativist organizations and then a series of restrictive state and federal laws. These laws followed the model of earlier legislation that had restricted Chinese immigration. New immigration from India and much of Asia was banned, and laws also restricted migrants from India from owning land or acquiring U.S. citizenship. Migrants from India were also barred from marrying white women, following a widespread pattern of bans on interracial marriages, previously especially aimed at African Americans. With restrictions on immigration, men from Punjab, again almost 90% Sikh, began to enter the US illegally from Mexico. Members of the Ghadar Party, a revolutionary organization formed by migrant workers and students from India, sometimes helped them across the border. In some cases, the Sikh men would abandon their long hair, beards, and turbans to make it easier to get into the US. They settled in the Imperial Valley near the Mexican border, and many married women of Mexican heritage. In some cases, the women insisted that the men shed their external identities, and the children of these marriages were always given Anglophone names and brought up in the Catholic faith. The children of this community typically accepted the label Hindu, and their paternal identities were characterized as Punjabi rather than Sikh. To understand the two dimensions of identity, Punjabi and Sikh, we return to the colonial Punjab of the 19th and early 20th century. Muslims were a slight majority in the region, while Hindus were by far the second largest religious group, with Sikhs constituting a little over 10% of the population. In all cases, kinship ties were salient, determining marriage patterns in particular, and there was some intermarriage among some Hindus and Sikhs. Religious observances were sometimes eclectic, with Sikhs and Hindus acknowledging the spiritual power of Sufi Muslim religious leaders, and members of all three traditions retained practices of folk religion, particularly in rural areas. British census practices and identity-based political representation sharpened broader religious identities, but these clearly existed before the colonial period, albeit with continued contestation as to the precise boundaries and markers of identity. Once British India and Punjab were partitioned, religious identities took on different political meanings. Hindu nationalism had emerged as a political project in the late 19th century, and while post-colonial India was avowedly secular, the position of non-Muslim minorities relative to the Hindu majority was somewhat precarious. For example, Mohandas Gandhi had stated in 1936 that Sikhs were, in his view, still Hindus. In some cases, Sikhs and others tried to address this by distinguishing between Hindu as a cultural category and as a religious category, a dual usage that had begun to emerge in the medieval period. For many Hindu intellectuals, there was and is no distinction, with Hindu encompassing both, making minorities either into subgroups or, in the case of Muslims and Christians, alien in some respect. However, Sikh identity was allowed to flourish in the post-colonial period, sometimes bolstered by continued military service in the Indian Army, and especially by the Green Revolution, where many farmers who made it successful were Sikhs in the Punjab. After World War II, US immigration policy was relaxed a little, and some new immigration from India took place. The major change came in 1965 as a response to the Cold War, seeking to project the US as a more open and welcoming place than its Soviet adversary. Immigration based on skills and on family ties was now allowed, and Sikhs were best placed to take advantage of the latter category, especially in California, because of their early immigration. Easing of restrictions on land ownership also allowed Sikh immigrants to start building wealth, and many who came from agricultural backgrounds in Punjab became successful farmers in California's Central Valley. Marriage often now involved bringing over a spouse from Punjab, preserving kinship ties and cultural heritage, with religion as part of that cultural bundle. Situations of global migration and new diasporas have invited theorizing as to the structures of the host societies. In the United Kingdom, Stuart Hall and Nina Werbner explored the idea of a new cosmopolitanism where the basic equality and shared identity of all humans is accepted, while differences are still respected. In the US, Kwame Anthony Appiah has similarly explored this framing. The new refers to distinguishing this approach from the old, Christian and European framing, where being cosmopolitan meant diminishing aspects of one's minority identity, assimilating in crucial ways to the dominant identity. Werbner goes further in contrasting cosmopolitanism with transnationalism, where migrants retain more of their distinctive identities brought from their locations of origin, especially with respect to religious practices and marriage patterns. There are other framings of multiculturalism and pluralism which may have less baggage than the term cosmopolitanism. Many diaspora Sikhs have been comfortable with shedding external identity markers, whether to fit in better in host societies or because they do not see it as a core aspect of being Sikh. This pattern has been present in Sikh history and waxes and wanes as external circumstances and community responses vary. The Sikh Rehat Maryada offers a compromise in which the Khalsa initiation is a normative ideal but not imposed as a sharp boundary marker. Even in India, the impacts of modernity, including changing marriage patterns and of Hindu nationalism, are shaping how Sikhs enact their tradition. Not all Sikhs agree on the normative weight of the Khalsa identity. Sikhs may choose to emphasize their Punjabi identity rather than that of being Sikh as a way of avoiding this debate. In India and in many other diaspora locations, the question of what might be a primary label are not salient, with both being used. Often political structures in the host country shape diaspora responses. In Malaysia, Sikhs accept being characterized as Hindus for certain kinds of political recognition. In the UK, Sikhs have been accepted as a race to avail of all protections against racial discrimination that do not extend to religious categories. Interestingly, decades ago, South Asians in the UK were often put in a category of black, while a century ago, South Asians in the US tried to get citizenship by claiming to be Caucasian and therefore white. In Canada, Kamla Nair, herself of Punjabi heritage, originally wrote about the Sikh diaspora but then shifted to the term Punjabi. But Hugh Johnston, another Canadian academic, objects to Sikhs describing themselves as Punjabi, seeing it as an appropriation of a broader term with meanings beyond those associated with diaspora Sikhs. Academic concerns about precision also lead to particular naming choices. Bruce Lebrac's seminal study of Sikhs in North America used that label unproblematically. Margaret Gibson's 1988 book, Accommodation Without Assimilation: Sikh Immigrants in an American High School, shifts to the term Punjabi within the book, explaining that this is done to encompass a small proportion of non-Sikhs in her sample, but almost all of her examples involve challenges faced by Sikh students and parents. Many organizations representing the community also choose the term Sikh, but an exception is the Punjabi American Heritage Society, founded in California in 1993. The challenges arise when history is appealed to in ways that can reflect colonial or assimilationist perspectives. Indeed, the new cosmopolitanism seems no different than the old in some cases. For example, Karen Leonard, who notes that Punjabi was a commonly preferred term for the Punjabi Mexican community, again because of the small proportion of non-Sikh Punjabis in the migrant population, goes so far as to say it was in fact a Punjabi diaspora, and to go back and emphasize Sikhs and Sikhism does violence to the historical experiences of the immigrants and their descendants. There are multiple problems with this view. The populations to whom Leonard denies Sikh identity were quick to build gurdwaras, Sikh places of worship, and used these as focal points for religious, social, and political activities. The fact that gurdwaras in Sikh tradition are open to all does not mean that they are not distinctively Sikh, nor does the use of the common English term temple. Indeed, the use of the term violence by Leonard to describe the alternative to her preferred labeling is problematic. The violence was in the racist laws that governed immigration, citizenship, marriage, and property ownership. This violence has continued long after the relaxation of immigration laws and other racist legal restrictions. Margaret Gibson documents the harassment and bullying of Sikh high school students by their white counterparts, including setting one girl's long hair on fire and pressuring observant Sikh students to abandon the external markers of their faith. Recognizing the constraints and violence faced by Sikh migrants does not diminish the resilience of populations like the Punjabi Mexican community. Leonard implicitly objects to their marginalization with respect to the later Sikh migrant community, but completely ignores the violence and marginalization that the later community still faces. Some of this perspective can be traced to a version of the old cosmopolitanism, but it also relies on a problematic analysis of colonial-era Punjab. As Anne Murphy has elucidated, that analysis does not match the actual historical circumstances, instead enacting nostalgia for a non-existent proto-multiculturalism. A different source of pressure in choices of self-identification comes from the politics of post-colonial India. In the 1980s, faced with the Sikh separatist movement, the Indian national security machinery equated Amritdhari, the Punjabi language term for Khalsa initiates, with terrorist. Years later in Canada, Kamla Nair noted how, to quote, "In Vancouver, Sikh fundamentalists are portrayed negatively as backward and violent. There is not only the link made between fundamentalism and turban wearers, but the reportage on Orthodox Sikhs is generally made in a bad light." Unfortunately, then, some academic claims to have perspectives of tolerance and cosmopolitanism end up aligning with the politics of dominance and erasure. These framings also tend to ignore socioeconomic backgrounds and economic status. One consequence of the portrayal of Sikhs in Indian government and other contexts is a hesitancy to put the Sikh aspect of identity forward. Punjabi identity is cultural, open, and safe, whereas Sikh identity is religious, narrow, and dangerous. In the case of the Punjabi American Heritage Society of Yuba City, its mission is, to quote, "to initiate, organize, and support education, charitable, cultural, and other beneficial programs deemed to have a positive impact on the cultural awareness of the public regarding the Punjabi culture." But Sikh religion is added on to this sentence, although it is absent from the name of the organization. The mission goes on to say, also to foster harmonious relationships with the public and to be a resource to the American people for a better understanding of the Punjabi culture, the Sikh religion, and its customs. This can be interpreted as a non-threatening way of introducing Sikhi to Americans, by which is meant white Christian Americans. But it is not clear that other Sikhs would choose this dichotomy of culture and religion, with one presented as exotic but safe and the other as alien and possibly threatening. A more recent framing of the shift from Punjabi to Sikh as a primary identity for visibility has been that of Punjabiyat, a pan-Punjabi identity which partly harks back to a supposed multicultural ideal, but also offers a normative view of cosmopolitanism where specific religious identities are backgrounded. What this idea of Punjabiyat ignores, as do some academics, are the inequalities of size and power for Sikhs versus other Punjabi communities, namely Hindus and Muslims. A stark example of the interplay of these issues of identity and erasure is in the case of a digital archive which began life with the name Sikh Pioneers. It was established and developed by Tejinder Singh Sibia, who was a librarian at the University of California, Davis, and attempted to create a comprehensive digital archive of the Sikh community in the US, but especially California. Sibia himself went by TED and did not maintain the external Sikh articles of faith, but he chose to present the experience of what he saw as his community, the Sikhs. However, after his death, the archive was appropriated by a European American and renamed Pioneering Punjabis. As in the case of the Punjabi American Heritage Society, Sikhness lurks in the background. Individual narratives are full of accounts where the Sikh dimension of these life stories plays a central role, but the Punjabi label is used everywhere that is prominent, with the implication that it is more inclusive and more acceptable within the traditionally dominant narrative of the United States. Sikh academics were shut out of this process, and local community members are rewarded for their compliance by receiving visibility, mediated or controlled by an outsider who lacks adequate knowledge. In this case, then, the identity of the community and all its internal debates about Sikh versus Punjabi are controlled and almost literally owned by someone else. There are numerous other issues that can be examined, including additional nuances of the labels Sikh and Punjabi, the role of gender, caste, and class, and the power relations embedded in academic institutions. Let's provide a brief single answer to the three initial questions. What are the dimensions of Sikh identity in diasporic locations in general and California in particular? What is the relationship of being Sikh to being Punjabi? What are the different factors that shape Sikh experience in various locations, but particularly in California? Sikh identity has been embedded in the diaspora from its early days, and its expression has survived a number of pressures. Sikhs have been adaptable and often choose to what extent they wish to adapt to host societies, sometimes to the point of making significant changes in their expressions of identity and foregrounding their Punjabiness. But one can easily underestimate the external pressures that minority communities face in maintaining expressions of themselves and their communities that they value. California, with a large and long-standing Sikh population, surprisingly provides examples of academic institutions and individuals within them deciding what is normatively appropriate for the Sikh community, under the guise of liberal tolerance or representing subgroups such as Sikh women. Along with the pressures of Hindu nationalism in India, this represents an under-recognized challenge for the Sikh community in California and in the United States.